Elizabeth, thank you for the question about fine or decorative art. The question of fine or decorative art. Can you believe, Elizabeth says, I'm sorry, can you please define fine art and decorative art? Lots of people mix decorative art as fine art. Furthermore, galleries will not define fine art. They say it's up to museums to determine it. After hearing this debate on Xanadu Gallery's site, it has me puzzled what artists and well-established galleries think of this definition. Hope you can shed some light. Well, there's two things I can't shed light on. One is what galleries think of that definition, or of the definition, or the definitions found in the Xanadu Gallery. And by the way, I do want to thank Jason on the Xanadu Gallery for doing that, for providing that open field for people to talk and letting questions come in like that. It was pretty good. You did an article, I guess, on your site that she forwarded to me. I read it and then read quite a number of the conversation points. And I would want to say, by the way, that I found them all fascinating, all the sort of the things that we all sort through in our minds. And I'm going to approach it just a little bit differently, just so you know. But I appreciated so many of the points. I'll probably refer to some of them as we go along. But galleries won't define fine art versus decorative art. They say it's up to museums to determine it. I'm not one of those guys who leaves anything up to museums. I mean, when you see what's in what's today called a Museum of Fine Arts, I have trouble with that because virtually anything goes in a Museum of Fine Art. And so I'd love to have their definition of what fine art is before they tell me what my art is. Do you see what I mean? And but let's get on. Let's just make points. I want to make some written points because I want to separate in a more precise way. I think the reason for the troubles we're having in this discussion are simple. So look at these. Look at this next set. I'm going to suggest to you there are two categories we're talking about here: fine art versus decorative art. That isn't fine art. Just means good art. Decorative art means a form of art, right? It's an art form. It's a category of art. But what's happened is people have decided that fine art is a category like decorative art. I suggest to you there's a better way to think about it. So let me just talk about categories of type, and then later we'll talk about categories of value or ways of evaluating it. But painting, I'm saying painting could be painting anywhere, all the way to pottery and so on. But everything is an art. There's so many things that have come down to being art. So I'm suggesting to you that cooking is an art form. People do this all the time. I mean, how can you possibly include this? We know that cooking doesn't hang on the wall and all that stuff. But no, cooking is an art form. Printmaking, teaching is an art form. Gardening, and there are classes in the gardening world between flower gardening and herbal gardening or whatever. Poetry is an art form. Sculpting, singing, dancing, and of course composing and music and all those things. These are art forms, are they not? So, and when you're talking about the most elevated ones, we can talk about the word fine, okay? So, but the subforms of painting are decoration. So that's anything from mural painting to wallpaper making to plate making, right? This is all decorative art, right? And we see great artists have done all of them, by the way. Illustration is one of this. When I say a subform, I don't mean a lower form. There's a class of animal under painting. So there are pictures that are done for illustration. There are pictures that are done to make a portrait of your friend or of your client. There are pictures that are done of still lifes and landscapes and done from life. There's mural pictures. Each one of these is its own land. It is its own form, subform within our form. Our form is painting. And it's better not to call it anything else. It was interesting having one of you respond to somebody who referred to herself as a painter and said, don't demean yourself. You're not just a painter. Well, I think of myself as just a painter. I mean, I think it's history should decide whether I'm a fine painter, whether it belongs in the category of fine art. And I don't mean history meaning some guy who has a museum going on and he has investments by rich people that he wants to make sure stand up over, their value stands up over time, so he has to feature them in museums. I don't mean anything like that. I'm talking about if all things were equal, that's why they talk about 100 years. If all things were equal, would the picture still be loved in 100 years by people who aren't even part of or by people that aren't even part of our culture? But then there are categories of quality. And that's where we talk from fine art to very crude low art, right? Low meaning uneducated and all those things. Well, meaning the opposite of this. So I make this list. So what's fine art? It's excellent art. It's highest quality, highly skillful, superior in quality, refined. These are all things I found in dictionary definitions. Highly accomplished, rare, great, highly elevated, high elevated, aesthetically especially, appealing to the highest minds, souls, and imaginations, appealing to the people with the greatest taste, whatever that is. Peak, top, exquisite, sophisticated, words like that, right? So when you're talking about fine art, all we need to think about really, and from my point of view, I don't think about anything else. If it's fine art, I just look at it and say, is it really so fine? And it has to, it has to be good in quite a number of ways to be considered fine art. But I don't have any interest in calling some amorphous thing fine art, meaning, and nobody can tell me what it is. All there is disagreement about that. If it's this other definition that's sitting out there where people can then say, yeah, but that's just decorative, or that's just illustration, but this is fine art. I don't think those are even slightly useful. And I'll show you why. So here's Michelangelo, the top two. Here's the Sistine ceiling and Sistine walls, whatever, and you're seeing, somebody we consider one of the greatest fine artists of all time doing decorative art, right? Now, is it fine decorative art? Yes, of the very finest, isn't it? He sort of set the standards for the times, didn't he? And Tiepolo down below. He reinvents practically mural painting. That's not one of the most brilliant, but it's still a wonderful piece of work. You see, he had these wonderful shapes to play with in that Baroque era. So the decorative artist is listening to the wall. He has to pay attention to it in terms of the colors he uses. One of the reasons I wasn't surprised about the Michelangelo when I started cleaning the pictures that they were really brilliant is because when you know how far away that ceiling is, how hard it would be to see the color of those pictures, you could see why he must have gone up and down that ladder quite a few times to figure out how rich to make those colors up there so they actually hold up and feel jewel-like or at least have color quality by the time you saw them from the floor. And especially maybe in a smoke-filled room and all the rest of that. So, the elements of the decorative necessity, right? So, and then here's the two Boston School painters. These are from the Library of Congress, and so these are by Benson, the top two, and the other two are by Sargent. These are decorations. These are. I suppose they're in the class of mural decorations, but they're just decorating little shapes on walls. You fill in the little shape. You make the patterns. You make the design fit the pattern. You make the color scheme fit the pattern. You're just making plates. You're just a mural. You're just a decorator. And and we're talking about some pretty fine work here, aren't we? This is really high level decoration. So it's fine. It's fine art. Now that's me. That's me saying, let's get over this problem, okay? Okay, so here we are looking at the what we think of as the more purely decorative, just plates, pottery, right? The right top two are the Greek vases that Ang even says, pay attention to these guys. Look at the way they do patterning. It's important to see these guys. These guys have a skill. This is a very high-end skill. It's not seen, I don't know if it's seen on anything since that time. The skill is such. And we're talking about the idea of pattern making, which is everything from cutout shapes, and the distribution of the sizes of the spots of dark and the spots of light and all that sort of thing. So the fascinating work, and these are just beginning ones. There's so many out there, so many beautiful ones out there. But the arts and crafts movement is, the Art Nouveau era. They're both full of this really beautiful pottery that elevates pottery. To what? Is this a fine art? Well, I don't think of pottery as a low art in the first place, except when it's low. When people do it badly, it's just a mundane art. Because you are making it for use, because it's there to decorate a wall, or even in the class of illustration, because it's there to be an illustration, doesn't have anything to do with whether its quality is such that you'd push it up there and say, this is highest quality, this is rare, this is sophisticated, this is fine. This stuff is like amazing. And the one below is Tiffany on the left, the lamp and the lamp stand there. It's really, really, really amazingly beautiful aesthetically. And then William Morris wallpaper, what's not to love, right? This is beautiful, beautiful stuff. Why would we demean the decorative arts? Why don't we just talk about the fine art of decoration, of fine, fine decoration. It's brilliant. And it's not a lower art. You know that idea of taking history painting and making it a better art than still life painting? It's a higher art. I don't even show one in here. I don't show still life either in this little conversation. But what are they doing when they do that, right? And what is the good of it in all reality? When you finally get down to it, people don't look at the painting that way. They don't look at it by subject. They just look at it by the emotional, if you want to call that the emotional slash aesthetic reaction, this thing that it does to you in the same way as music does it to you. And so ultimately, the still life is judged by the same qualities as the history painter, the mural painter, any of these things. Um, yeah, so have that in mind. All right, and I'm going further. Here's a guy who's making posters. This is Muka, if that's pronounced right. And Sarah Bernhardt did a bunch of movies, did a bunch of theater performances, not movies. I think they were not movies that he did the posters for. That Muka did the posters for. Down below is a variation on this way of working, this flat cutout pattern thing, which is very much a contribution of decorative art, like on jars or cookie tins or those sorts of things, right? But as well as poster work, the simplicity of it, the big reading simplicity of it, and then he goes and uses it in a regular, what you might call a regular painting, in a and what some people then would call fine art. But again, this is these forms are in and out of each other. The styles, none of that makes any difference. It's the quality of the work that makes it fine art, not the manner, and not the subject, and not the use. Okay, so here are the American illustrators. Upper left, N.C. Wyeth. What's Not to Love? There in the right, Maxfield Parrish. I always loved that one. That's where I learned the idea of scale and the importance of scale. When I saw the size of that guy in relation to the trees, you get that sense. Michelangelo had a marvelous sense of grandeur that fit like that was in this class. Maybe he's the guy that sort of educated us in it. But and then down below the story of the storytelling illustration of Rockwell. These things, and by the way, the pictures in person are well painted in the same crafty ways as good painting historically has been. So people who want to believe that I'm this person who dismisses illustration in the same way as some people have just illustrated decoration as not having the capacity to be a fine art just don't see big enough and don't understand what I'm saying. This is huge. Uh, and by the way, in the conversation that included Schmidt, I referred to an illustrative something I was guessing must be an illustrator's technique because I'd never seen it employed. This use of the brush holding little brushes and holding them up very close, and I know that's done. I don't. And by the way, with little tiny like miniature work and stuff like that. But I wondered, and I think I was wondering aloud in that video if that was actually something that was being taught in perhaps an illustrating school. But I was just guessing. But it wasn't an intention to demean anybody at all because of that. And I'm not part of that discussion. I wish neither side would be dismissive of, these aren't sides anyway, but neither form would be dismissive of the other form as not having the capacity to be a fine art. And obviously, in one of your jobs as an illustrator, if you're doing it for a book, is to make sure that when the pages turn, it does its job for the book. That it really goes well with the story, with the part of the story that it needs to, and that it expresses well uh, the mood and the content of the page. I mean, isn't that the point? And then on top of that, of course, if you're making images visually, then aren't you trying to make that thing beautiful in all those color ways, form ways, design ways that we all consider to be sum and substance of the way pictures are made? Of course you do, and the person who does it best with all those categories reaches the highest level, the point we consider to be the finest of these arts, right? And there are lots of levels of fineness, as I said, and there, and it's not for me. I don't even like the idea of judging this guy finer than that guy. Most people are actually working within their own field so much that it's very difficult to make any cross comparisons. Who's best? It really doesn't make much sense. What really matters is that once you get what they're after within their field, Have they mastered it? Are they doing it well? And etc. So, and the question of illustration, I mean, all good painters, all painters are illustrators of one kind or other if you're representational. If you're abstract, it's actually different. I can't find the subject of abstract paintings no matter what they tell me. And I'm kind of rather guessing the subject is non-existent. It's the subject is abstract. It really is the play of color relations or linear relations and all those things that are purely the underlying stuff of the eye, which I think, and as you'll see at the end here, I think Degas leads to. So, so then you get to this, and I'm again still talking about the subject matter question as it relates to things like illustration. But here's, and this isn't about decoration right now. These are very decorative. They're beautiful. These color qualities and these relationships, as seen in nature. And this guy was is very much the honest observer is drawing forth the beauty of the relationships they saw within nature. And you can see easily, you could find color scheme after color scheme, one picture after the other as the day changed and the time of day and all those things. But this guy is the student of the look of nature, right? And that relational world that makes the song ultimately. And then following him, the guy who called himself an impressionist in line is Degas. And of course, for me, the subject matter in both these cases is irrelevant. I mean, he's not trying to tell you anything important about dancers. I mean, he just finds that's a vastly rich field. I mean, you can make any pattern you want because, like that one on the left, that tree could have been a cutout. It was a cutout, a piece of cardboard painted on as a prop, and the girls were running behind the tree. The dancing women were running behind the tree in the with the movement that they were trying to create. But Degas has taken our art form to a whole another level, and as I think he's refined, he's actually crystallized it. He's actually brought it down to what it really is. And all the other forms are all wonderful, but this is the one thing all of them, in my view, all the visual arts need to be aware of, and that is their job is music to the eye, right? Now that's me. I mean, but I suggest to you that's one of the key elements in the painting. It's no less important to think that way than it is to think about the form, right? But anyway, let me just talk about Degas for a second in the ways we're talking about. And by the way, Degas is the guy who considered himself a decorator out of a job. So he's rather entertaining to come full circle to Degas, isn't it? So here's the decorator talking to us, right? And here you see the weaving, as a decorator would do, the weaving like if you're doing wallpaper, the weaving of colors, the oranges weaving through the tree all the way through, the blues coming through the pinks, all these things, the weaving of color. Then you see the intermittent play of form, this tubular. Well, let's talk about the long form here, and just the reaching up of the tree and the reaching up of the arms, right? And this tubular quality by form. So, which matches and plays off of the forms, the actual forms of the body. They're playing to each other, right? This is the advanced music making, where it stops being realism and starts being something considerably more pure. And I say that with all due respect, and as a person who actually uses considerably more realism than Degas. And by the way, here's one of the great draftsmen, and he realized the point he got to was the one very much like what Ang suggested, and that is that to really be a great color craftsman and to really be able to let color play. And some people would say, well, it's just he was going blind. I'm not convinced of that, but there's an element of that in this, that leads you to this. But maybe we should just thank heaven for the gift, if it was that he was going blind, because it's true for all of us. But we're talking about, though, the fact, as Ang says, that you don't do his kind of fine drawing and consider it appropriate for stained glass. And he's talking about separating color. Anybody who hasn't seen that Geniot dessin thing that I send out, the Geniot collation of Ang quotes, ask me for it. I'll send it to you. But that very first quote in the thing talks about how color doesn't and drawing really don't mix quite the way you would like them to. And so I'm going to be the greatest of both in a single picture. And this guy's actually obviously embraced that and realizes that. But each one of these things has these qualities of play, form play, pattern play, color play, light play, line play. I mean, it goes right through the entire gamut of what is the very underlying nature of our form. And our form is a visual form. When it comes to representational painting, what we're representing actually is things like form, things like gesture, angle, things like that. It's much bigger than the subject matter itself, and the importance of subjects. I'm saying something very important here. Um, most of which most people in the world will never know what the heck you're talking about, which is one of those things that's pretty remarkable. You're not going to win anybody to your religion or anything else by making beautiful pictures in that category. You're more likely to do it by being a really great craftsman, by becoming a really fine artist. But so in this form, this is an evolution of impressionism. You're still talking about a fine, fine form that has nothing to do with the fineness that was represented by Jerome. A very fine, exquisite drawing. The French had this love of something that it's almost feminine in its fineness. It's not feminine in the most exquisitely beautiful, positive possible way that I hope all women love and respect about themselves. But that quality of fineness, that refinedness that you see in Ang and so many of the salon painters, in Jerome. I mean, the line quality, the fineness of it is just magnificent. But it isn't the sum and substance of what makes fine art by any stretch. And this form here actually proves it. What Degas is doing, there's a greater art here than there is in almost any history painting. Now, I make an exception for Jerome. Jerome's one of the great designers of all time. So I'm not in any way critiquing him and making a comparison that way. I'm simply saying that we are now talking about something, the aesthetic of our world, the aesthetic of the visual, that crosses all these other boundaries that we think were the fine art. And so this is much like I was saying about, Rembrandt and his crude way of doing certain things, still having the capacity to elevate himself above somebody who did finer work and might have even critiqued uh, uh, Rembrandt for what he didn't do. So I'm hoping that Elizabeth, that what comes across to you is the underlying thing is that we're talking about. It's better to talk about fine art as just highly elevated in its skill levels, and let the categories talk for themselves. Let us worry about how good you are within your category, and define your own category if you want, and then find yourself at the highest possible level you can once you grasp what that would be. So that's my best ever first shot. But as much as these sort of esoteric issues, you could say esoteric. How esoteric are they? How important are they? But uh, hugely, I guess. But it's difficult. It's much easier to talk about craft and talk about the how-tos and things like that. And I mean to get back to that again right soon here. So, all right. So, any more questions? Any more comments, questions, subscribers, shares? All those things are hugely welcome. And thank you for what we have so far, what you brought to us so far. All right. See you next time.